The Perfect Deception. Chapter 1. The Call to Investigate. Detective Emma Lawson sat alone in her dimly lit office, the steady hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. She was lost in thought, staring at a series of case files scattered on her desk when the phone rang, breaking her concentration. The voice on the other end was urgent, almost too calm, like someone trying not to sound desperate. "Detective Lawson, we have a situation that needs your expertise," said Captain Reynolds, the head of the local precinct. His voice carried a weight that Emma recognized immediately. This wasn't just any case, it was something big. "What's the situation, Captain?" she asked, already pulling her notebook closer. "We found a body at the old Ashton estate," he replied. "It looks like an open-and-shut case of murder, but there are details that don't sit right. We need you to take a look." Emma felt a rush of adrenaline. The Ashton estate had a dark reputation, a mansion abandoned for years, surrounded by rumors and ghost stories. The idea that a crime had been committed there sent a shiver down her spine, but it also intrigued her. She grabbed her coat and badge, her mind already racing through possibilities. Arriving at the scene, the mansion looked even more eerie in the fading light of dusk. Yellow police tape fluttered in the cool evening breeze, and officers moved around the area, their faces grim. The victim, a local businessman named Charles Davis, lay lifeless in the grand hall, his eyes wide open as if shocked by his last sight. "Who found the body?" Emma asked, kneeling beside the corpse to examine it more closely. "His wife, Margaret Davis," replied Officer Carter. "She claims they had an argument earlier in the day, and when she returned to apologize, she found him like this." Emma looked up at Carter, her eyes narrowing. "Claims? Do you have doubts about her story?" Carter hesitated. "She was too composed when we arrived. No tears, no visible shock. Just, come." Emma nodded, making a mental note. She studied the scene, noticing a set of muddy footprints leading away from the body and stopping abruptly by the window. Her instincts told her there was more to this than met the eye. Turning to Margaret Davis, who sat quietly on the staircase, her hands trembling slightly, Emma asked, "Mrs. Davis, can you tell me exactly what happened here tonight?" Margaret looked up, her expression blank but her eyes flickering with something. Fear, perhaps, or was it something else entirely? I don't know," Margaret stammered. "We argued about money, like we always do. I left to clear my head, and when I came back, he was just gone." Emma felt a chill. There was something off about Margaret's story, something rehearsed. She was hiding something, but what? "Mrs. Davis," Emma said, her voice steady and probing, "we're going to need to ask you a few more questions down at the station. There are some inconsistencies in your account that we need to clarify." As Margaret's face paled, Emma knew she had struck a nerve. Whatever was happening here, it was only the beginning. "Looks like we've got ourselves a puzzle," she whispered to herself as she watched Margaret get escorted to the patrol car. But something in the air, in Margaret's demeanor, suggested that the real mystery was only just starting to unravel. Stay tuned. The truth is never what it seems, and every clue could lead to an unexpected twist. What do you think of the story so far? Share and subscribe to follow the suspenseful unraveling of The Perfect Deception. Chapter 2. The Unseen Evidence. Back at the precinct, Detective Emma Lawson sat across from Margaret Davis in the cold, sterile interrogation room. Margaret's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her scarf, a habit Emma noted as a possible sign of anxiety. Or was it guilt? Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret was hiding something, that her calm demeanor was nothing more than a well-practiced mask. "Mrs. Davis," Emma began, her voice soft but probing, "you mentioned that you argued with your husband about money. Was there anything else he might have said or done that could have led to this?" Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting to the mirrored wall. She seemed to be calculating her words, choosing them with care. "No, just the usual arguments. He was always so difficult about finances." "Difficult in what way?" Emma pressed, leaning slightly forward. "He accused me of spending too much," Margaret said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He thought I was wasting his money, but it was my money too." Emma could feel the tension in the air, like a thread stretched too thin. Margaret's story had cracks, and Emma was determined to pry them open. She knew that the truth often hid in the smallest details, in the things people tried to gloss over. Just then, the door to the interrogation room opened, and Captain Reynolds stepped in, his expression unreadable. He handed Emma a file marked Forensic Report. Emma's eyes skimmed over the details, her mind processing each word with growing concern. The mud on the victim's shoes and the footprints at the scene, Reynolds said, they don't match. It's as if someone tried to stage the scene, but they made a mistake. Emma looked up sharply. You're saying someone planted evidence to make it look like Mr. Davis was somewhere he wasn't? Exactly, Reynolds confirmed. And there's more. We found traces of a substance on the floor near the body, something like a fine powder. Emma's heart skipped a beat. A staged scene, mismatched footprints, and now an unidentified substance? This case was becoming more twisted by the second. Whoever was behind this had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, but they had slipped up. She turned back to Margaret, who now seemed even more uneasy, her earlier composure starting to crack. Mrs. Davis, can you explain why the mud at the scene doesn't match anything found on your husband's shoes? Or perhaps you'd like to tell us about this powder? Margaret's eyes widened for a split second before she regained her composure, her hands still clutching the scarf tightly. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, but her voice wavered, betraying her fear. Emma wasn't buying it. She knew Margaret was holding back, and that the answers lay in those unseen details. As she gathered her notes and prepared to leave the room, she looked Margaret in the eye, holding her gaze with an intensity that promised she wouldn't stop digging until she uncovered the truth. Mrs. Davis, Emma said slowly, you'd better hope that whatever you're hiding, it's worth it. Because sooner or later, the truth always comes out. As Emma walked out of the room, she felt the weight of the case pressing down on her. The deeper she went, the more it felt like someone was watching her every move, anticipating her next step. And for the first time, she wondered if she was being led down a path designed to deceive her. Don't miss what's coming next. Secrets are unraveling, and each twist will leave you questioning everything. Are you enjoying the suspense? Subscribe and share to stay on the edge of your seat. Chapter 3. The Trap Tightens. Emma sat back in her office, staring at the crime board in front of her. Photographs of the scene, notes on Margaret Davis's alibi, and details from the forensic report were pinned in a chaotic pattern. Despite the evidence, nothing felt solid, every clue seemed to slip through her fingers like smoke. The powder they'd found at the scene turned out to be a specific blend of chalk used in industrial settings, common in warehouses but strange in a mansion like the Ashton estate. Emma made a note to investigate any recent shipments to local businesses that might have handled that material. She was determined to trace its origin, believing it might lead her closer to whoever was trying to mislead her. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Officer Carter stepped in, holding a sealed evidence bag with a flash drive inside. We found this in the drawer of Mr. Davis's study at the mansion, he said. It wasn't logged in the initial search, almost like someone tried to hide it in plain sight. Emma's pulse quickened as she reached for the bag. Let's see what's on it. In the tech room, the flash drive revealed encrypted files, but Carter managed to crack the code after several attempts. What they found left both of them speechless, a series of emails between Charles Davis and an unknown recipient, discussing large sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts. It seemed like Charles was involved in some kind of shady business deal, one he was desperate to keep hidden. Emma's mind raced. Could this be the reason for the argument between Charles and Margaret? Was she unaware of his secret dealings, or was she a part of it? The more Emma thought about it, the more she began to see Margaret not as a grieving widow but as a player in a much bigger game. Carter, I need you to find out who these emails were going to, Emma said, her voice urgent. And cross-check them with any known aliases in our database. We need to know who Charles Davis was working with. Carter nodded and got to work immediately. Emma knew time was against them. The more they uncovered, the closer they got to whoever was pulling the strings. As she turned back to the crime board, a thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. What if Margaret wasn't the mastermind? What if she was being framed? Just then, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, and when she answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. Then, a low, distorted voice crackled through the line. You're getting too close, detective. Back off, or you'll regret it. Emma's blood ran cold. Whoever was on the other end knew exactly what she was doing and how close she was to unraveling their plan. But instead of fear, all Emma felt was determination. She'd faced threats before, but this time was different. This time, it felt personal. She slammed the phone down and grabbed her jacket. "I'm not backing off," she muttered to herself. "Not until I find out who's behind this." Emma knew that the trap was tightening, but she was ready. The game had changed, and now she was playing by her own rules. But as she walked out of the precinct, a shadow moved just beyond her line of sight, watching her every step. Emma was in deeper than she realized, and the puppet master pulling the strings was closer than she could have ever imagined. The suspense is building. The mystery deepens with every clue, and each step could lead to an explosive reveal. Are you hooked yet? Subscribe and share to see where this chilling puzzle leads. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Dark. Emma's thoughts were a tangled mess as she drove back to the Ashton estate. The mansion loomed ahead, its silhouette dark against the evening sky, every window like a pair of eyes watching her approach. She parked the car and stood still for a moment, listening to the whisper of the wind through the trees. This place held secrets, and she was determined to uncover them all. She stepped inside the grand hall, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. She retraced her steps from the night they found Charles Davis's body, focusing on the small details she might have missed before. Her eyes landed on the fireplace, its stone mantle covered in a fine layer of dust, except for one spot, which was strangely clean. Emma moved closer, running her fingers over the smooth area. It felt different, like a hidden latch or a trigger. With a quick push, a faint click echoed in the room, and a section of the wall beside the fireplace slid open, revealing a narrow passage leading down into darkness. Her heartbeat quickened. She hesitated for only a second before descending into the hidden passage. Each step was slow, careful, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. At the bottom, she found a small room filled with shelves, and on one of them lay stacks of documents and a laptop, its screen glowing faintly in the dark. Emma's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. They were records of transactions, business deals, and more references to the offshore accounts she had seen in Charles's emails. But then something else caught her eye: photographs. Dozens of them, showing not just Charles but also Margaret, laughing and shaking hands with a man Emma didn't recognize. She was about to take a closer look when a noise echoed from the top of the stairs, the creak of a floorboard, followed by the soft whisper of a breath. Someone else was here. Emma quickly turned off the laptop screen and hid behind the shelves, her hand reaching for her gun. She could hear the footsteps descending, slow and deliberate, as if the person knew exactly where they were going. Her pulse pounded in her ears, the tension unbearable. The figure reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped just a few feet from her hiding spot. Emma held her breath, ready to confront whoever it was, when suddenly, the person turned and left, their steps retreating quickly back up the stairs. She caught a glimpse of their face as they disappeared, a flash of recognition that made her stomach drop. It was Officer Carter. Emma's mind reeled. Why was he here? What was he doing sneaking around in the hidden room? She stayed hidden for a few moments longer, her thoughts racing. Could Carter be involved in this whole thing, feeding her false leads and watching her every move? The idea of betrayal twisted in her gut, but she knew she couldn't confront him yet, not without more evidence. She waited until the mansion was silent again, then made her way back up the passage. As she stepped into the cold night air, she felt like she had crossed into enemy territory. Nothing was as it seemed, and now even those closest to her were under suspicion. Emma knew one thing for sure: this was no longer just a murder investigation. It was a dangerous game, and she was up against an opponent who was always one step ahead, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried. The plot thickens. Who can Emma trust when even her allies might be enemies in disguise? Stick around for the next twist in this game of deception. Subscribe and share to see how deep the conspiracy goes. Chapter 5. Trust Shattered. Back at the precinct, Emma sat alone in the dimly lit records room, surrounded by dusty files and the hum of the fluorescent lights. Her mind was spinning with what she had just discovered. Carter, her colleague, her trusted ally, was now the prime suspect in a twisted game of deception. She knew she had to tread carefully. One wrong move could blow her cover and put her directly in the crosshairs. She opened her laptop and started digging into Officer Carter's background, searching for any irregularities. At first glance, his record was spotless. Commendations for bravery, a history of solved cases, nothing that hinted at anything shady. But Emma knew how easy it was to hide in plain sight, to wear a mask of honesty while concealing a web of lies. Then she found it, a small discrepancy, almost buried in the system. A series of large deposits into an account under his wife's name, all within the last 6 months. The amounts were substantial, much more than a police officer's salary would justify. Emma's eyes narrowed as she jotted down the details. This was it, a crack in the armor, the first sign that Carter wasn't as clean as he appeared. Just as she was about to dig deeper, her office phone rang. It was Captain Reynolds, his tone clipped and urgent. "Lawson, I need you in my office. Now." Emma felt a pang of dread as she made her way to Reynolds's office. When she entered, she found him standing by the window, his expression a mix of frustration and something else she couldn't quite place. Carter was there too, sitting in one of the chairs, looking unusually calm. "Emma," Reynolds began, his voice cold, "it's come to our attention that you've been conducting an unauthorized investigation into Officer Carter's personal affairs." Emma's blood ran cold. Carter met her gaze with a small, knowing smile that made her skin crawl. He'd set her up. Somehow, he'd turned the tables, and now she was the one under scrutiny. "I have reason to believe that Carter is connected to the Davis case in ways we didn't initially suspect," Emma replied, keeping her voice steady even though she felt like she was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. "There are unexplained deposits in his accounts, ties to the offshore funds that—" "Enough," Reynolds interrupted, his tone sharp. "We're talking about one of our own, Lawson. I expect more than just theories." Carter stood up slowly, his smile widening as he looked at her with mock pity. "You know, Emma, it's not healthy to jump to conclusions without solid evidence. It makes you look paranoid." Emma clenched her fists under the table, the urge to scream at his smug face nearly overwhelming. She realized now that this was exactly what he wanted, to discredit her, to make her look like the one chasing shadows while he slipped deeper into the darkness. "Captain, with all due respect," Emma said, her voice ice cold, "I'm not going to back down from this. I'm going to prove that Carter is involved in the Davis murder, and I'll bring you all the evidence you need to see just how deep this goes." Reynolds stared at her, his jaw clenched. "Fine, Lawson. But understand this, if you're wrong, this will cost you your career. Make sure you're willing to bet everything on it." Emma nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She had nothing left to lose now, the only way out was through. As she turned to leave, Carter's voice stopped her at the door. "Good luck, detective," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll be watching your every move." Emma walked out without another word, but inside, she was seething. The game had changed again, and now it was war. She knew that Carter was hiding something much bigger than she had imagined, and he was willing to destroy anyone who got too close. But Emma also knew one thing he didn't: she was no longer just a pawn in this game. She was about to turn the tables and become the queen who would checkmate the king. Hold on tight. The stakes have never been higher, and the final showdown is coming. Will Emma uncover the truth before it's too late? Subscribe and share to see the thrilling conclusion of The Perfect Deception. Chapter 6. The Final Revelation. Emma sat in her car outside the Ashton estate once more, the darkness around her feeling like a shroud of secrets waiting to be torn apart. She had one last chance to expose the truth, to find the evidence that would put Carter away and clear her name. Every instinct told her that the answers were hidden here, within the old walls of the mansion that seemed to pulse with the echoes of a conspiracy. With a deep breath, she got out of the car and made her way into the house, her flashlight slicing through the inky blackness. She returned to the hidden room behind the fireplace, determined to find anything she might have missed. This time, she brought a forensic kit, ready to analyze every corner, every inch of the space. As she carefully examined the shelves, her fingers brushed against a loose panel. Pulling it open, she found a hidden compartment containing a small, sleek black box. Inside was a stack of memory cards, each meticulously labeled with dates that lined up with key moments in the investigation. Emma inserted one of the cards into her laptop. What she saw made her blood run cold. Security camera footage from the Ashton estate, showing Charles Davis meeting secretly with none other than Officer Carter. They weren't just talking, they were arguing fiercely, their faces twisted with anger. The audio crackled with Charles's voice, desperate and pleading. "You promised me protection," Charles shouted. "I kept my end of the deal. You can't just back out now." Carter's response was icy, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're a loose end, Charles. And loose ends need to be cut off." Emma's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. Carter wasn't just involved, he was the mastermind behind the entire operation. He had orchestrated Charles Davis's murder to tie up loose ends in their dirty dealings, and then framed Margaret to deflect suspicion away from himself. Before Emma could react, she heard the floorboards creak behind her. She turned around to see Carter standing in the doorway, his face a mask of rage and desperation. "Impressive, detective," he said, his voice calm but edged with menace. "I knew you were good, but I didn't think you'd get this far." Emma stood her ground, her hand hovering near her holster. "It's over, Carter. I have everything I need to expose you. The footage, the emails, your entire operation is about to come crashing down." Carter's eyes narrowed, and he gave a slow, chilling smile. "You really think you can walk out of here alive with that evidence? You're in too deep, Lawson. No one's coming to save you." In a flash, Carter lunged at her, but Emma was ready. She sidestepped his attack and swung her arm, striking him across the face. Carter stumbled, but he quickly regained his footing, pulling a gun from his belt. The two of them circled each other in the confined space, tension crackling like electricity. "Think about it, Emma," Carter said, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You can join me. We could rule the city's underworld. No more chasing criminals, we'd be the ones in control." Emma's eyes hardened. "I'm not like you, Carter. I don't betray everything I stand for just to make a quick buck." With that, she lunged forward, knocking the gun from his hand. They struggled, grappling with each other, but Emma managed to pin him against the wall, locking his arms behind his back. She held him there, panting with adrenaline, as she reached for her phone to call for backup. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air outside the mansion. Officers stormed the estate, taking Carter into custody. As they led him away in handcuffs, he turned to Emma one last time, his face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over, Lawson," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've started." Emma watched as they hauled him into the police car, a sense of victory mingling with the chilling realization that he might be right. The corruption went deeper than Carter, and there were likely others still out there, watching, waiting for their moment to strike. But for now, the truth was out, and Emma Lawson had won. She knew the battle was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever to bring justice to those who thought they were untouchable. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and let us know what you thought in the comments.